All right, so today we are looking at our first chapter here in the weight loss specialist manual. So we are going to be kind of working our way out of this. We can call it a textbook. It is a textbook. It's just not, there's no hard copy of the textbook that kind of exists. But this is where we're going to be hanging out today. We're going to be looking at chapters 1 and 2. So, you know what? 17 pages with most of those pages being charts and pictures. So it's a gentle day, which is kind of nice because I know you guys we wrapped up our final yesterday, but we are looking at the obesity epidemic. And what I mean by that, when I say it's an epidemic, right, is it is something that is very prevalent in our country that we are dealing with. Like most people, and we can say most people because it's over 50%. Of people are overweight or obese. In fact, it's much higher than that. So our objectives today are kind of to understand what our role is. How are we going to fit into the conversation when we're talking about like obesity and clients who are overweight, all the health effects that it has and stuff. And so after this chapter, we want you guys to be able to understand the difference between overweight versus obese. We've already talked about that in physiology, so that should come pretty naturally. A big part of the thing we're going to talk about is like, why are we dealing with this? Like what's going on? Like, what have we done? Because it wasn't a problem back in the day, and then statistically how it affects like both adult and youth populations. So this first half of the PowerPoint is chapter 1. And then we'll have chapter 2 after that. So, but we do know that obesity is linked to a lot of different negative diseases. It's certainly related to coronary heart disease, which is where, remember your heart is the organ that pumps blood around your whole body. So it's just like any other tissue, right? All of the tissues in your body need oxygen delivery. So if all of a sudden you have a lack of oxygen delivery going to your heart, just like any other cells, it's going to stop working. And it's the thing that pumps blood everywhere. So that's the number one thing that we want to keep moving, that in our brain, right? But we know that obesity is related to stroke. It's related to coronary heart disease. It's related to hypertension. All of those things are going to put us at increased risk of morbidity, right? It's related to type 2 diabetes. Abdominal fat in particular acts in very weird ways with our organs. It's going to lead to hyperlipidemia, aka bad cholesterol, right? High cholesterol. And that's not good. It's linked to certain types of cancers. Now, the cancer thing, it's kind of a two-part conversation. It could be because there's just more cells, there's more fat cells. And then one of the things that your body does when it stores something that it doesn't want to hold on to, or it just doesn't care, it just wants to shove it somewhere and forget about it. It usually stores it in fat cells because fat cells are, they're these big empty sacs that normally store triglycerides. But let's say you eat an artificial sweetener or a piece of Teflon gets into your bloodstream, or just something that is not like organic and your body's like, I don't know what to do with that. And it's in the blood now, so it's here forever, right? For the most part, your body's just going to shove it into a fat cell. That is usually what causes like a free radical, right? Remember those atoms, those molecules that start stripping electrons from surrounding tissues. That isn't necessarily like adipose tissue. It's not necessarily fat's fault, but it is where your body stores it. So the more fat that you have, the more likely you are to have an increased risk of cancer. And that's one of the interesting things about it. Also, the decisions and lifestyle that lead to obesity are often sort of overlapping with the ones that, increase our risk of cancer. And then even things like depression. Remember, diabetes is a hormonal problem, right? Insulin is a hormone. It's a metabolic condition. It's a metabolic disorder, but like it's a hormone that's not working the way it's supposed to. Other hormones also don't work the way they're supposed to when you are obese, which can cause like, imbalances emotionally and psychologically. So that is going to feel very bad. And it's a huge economic burden as well. We know the financial burden. This is back in 2008. It's so much worse than that now. But it was estimated that $147 billion a year were spent on medical bills related to obesity. And they were only 78 billion 10 years before that, right? Let's see how much it is now. How much did the medical industry spend on obesity? And we'll go back to 2019, pre-corona. 170 billion. What year? I don't see what year. I don't know. It could be, that's pretty similar. Yeah. So 170 billion around whenever that article was, or whenever it was last taken. So that's a lot of money, man. We spent a lot of money. That's one of the things that, like, when I used to work for Biggest Loser and stuff, people would sometimes ask me, like, man, like, it's like $1,400 a week. How does anybody afford that? And I was like, well, remember, it's like a very educational experience. Like, they're not just working out for a week. They're not getting a trainer who's charging $1,400 a week. What they're getting is, like, it's a vacation, so they're getting all their meals paid for. It's been about $1,400 a week on a cruise, probably, and it's very similar. The only difference is this cruise actually helps you exercise, go on hikes, and educates people on, like, a healthy lifestyle. Whenever I hear that, I argue, how can somebody not afford it? Because honestly, $1,400 a week for 2, maybe even 3 weeks, if you can't afford it, is a lot cheaper than a heart attack. And so, like, that is definitely something that I, like, firmly believe, right? Because, like, this costs us so much money healthcare wise. That's a lot of people spending a lot of money on something that is fairly preventable. Currently, it is a little bit higher than this, but we were seeing it was about 69.2% of adults were overweight or obese. If we take a look at those statistics now, the state of obesity statistics. So you guys can actually look at these if you're ever interested. You can go to thestateofobesity.com. This is looking at, like, a lot of, like, adult and childhood obesity rates. Now, this is obesity rate. So remember, obese is going to be defined as a BMI above 30. This is not overweight. This is just obese in general, right? So when we look at this, we're looking at which states are, really struggling with these statistics. Whoops, that's what I want to do. We're going to see Mississippi is number 1. My girlfriend's from Mississippi. I always give her a hard time about this. 39.7% of the population. Those 40% of people in Mississippi here are obese, not just overweight, right? The lowest statistic, the sort of the state that's doing the best, is Colorado, because it's always freaking Colorado. They're always doing the best. Colorado, Hawaii, and Oregon are usually at the top, although Oregon's not at the top anymore. But Colorado, but it's still 24% of the population. 24% of the population is obese, right? District of Columbia, actually, DC's number 2 in the number 2 slot now. Huh. It's usually Hawaii is next. That's
Brad, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
But the way they're doing these percentages, what is their population? So, for example, like California is showing, like, that red, like, we're kind of high, but we're also very densely populated versus, say, some of these smaller states who say they had 5 people living there, only one of them is obese. That's 1/5 the people were.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great question. So the way that they did this is they can't survey the whole state. This isn't part of, like, the US Census, because we just did the census, right? It did not ask you what your BMI is,
Good.
Yeah, really. I mean, seriously, if we wanted, like, accurate data, it actually would. But what they do is they survey, let's say, like, 1,000 people or 10,000 people or whatever. And then they just look at the statistics, and then they assume that that is the same across the whole state. So they're measuring, like, let's say they go to, like, every county in the state, right? I don't know how many counties are in California. I don't know how many counties are in Oregon or whatever. And let's say they surveyed 100 people from each county. That'll give you a pretty even distribution of how people work across the state as a whole. And then, yes, they probably measured more people in Texas or California or New York, but the percentage of that 100 people is meant to kind of act as the percentage for everyone. So really, the math is the same. It isn't like certain voting systems that unfortunately don't work the way that they were supposed to. This is actually going to be a much more accurate, viewpoint of actual obesity. But I like where your head's at. And if we were having a conversation about voting lines, I would be on the other side of this argument. But I think that this is actually a pretty good way of doing it. Like if I asked everybody in our class, what their BMI is, and then I went to the medical assistant class, which has about 3 times as many students as we do, and asked them, I would look at the percentage, right? And that's how it would be. That's how it shakes out. So let's go back a couple years. Let's take a look at this. And remember, this is obese. I'm not looking at overweight statistics here. So in our PowerPoint, it says like 70% of people are overweight. That's pretty accurate. It's about 74% right now. But that's just overweight, not obese. This is obese, right? And remember, this is all based on BMI. So like maybe some of the people in this, maybe all of Texas is bodybuilders, so their BMI is high, but they're all like a low body fat percentage. I don't believe that is true, but surely there is some aspect there. But let's go back to 2010. Let's go back 10 years and watch this chart, guys. Click. That is a huge difference. So we had, what percentage of Mississippi? 39% in 2020. In 2010, Mississippi was still ranking number 1, but they were ranking number 1 at 34%. So that's a pretty substantial difference. And then Colorado is like a holdout over here, under 20% of the population, 19.8. Again, Colorado being the freaking healthiest. Oregon pops up there in the 3rd slot every now and then, but not in recent years. Go back to the year 2000, and it gets much better looking. So what the heck, man? I mean, look at this. Colorado's at 14.5% of the population, right? So why are healthcare costs rising? There's more people dealing with all these comorbidities. I know with COVID, that's like a conversation I've had with doctors. People are like, oh, we're protecting our seniors by, taking all these precautions. And every doctor I've ever talked to is like, I mean, we keep talking about like saving grandma and, mom and dad and stuff. But honestly, like I've seen seniors beat COVID, no problem. And I've seen obese people struggle, even if they're in their 30s, and it makes everything metabolically more difficult, right? Particularly abdominal fat. We do know that like having a high BMI doesn't mean you're at increased risk, it's having excessive abdominal fat that really is the problem. So let's define it. Let's break this down. I know you guys already know this, because we recently talked about this, but again, we're going to define body mass index as your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared, right? So if that number gives you, below 18.5, that is also very risky. That is not healthy, right? Below 18.5 is going to put our client in the underweight category. We see a lot of health problems associated with that. Ideally, we want to be somewhere between 18.5 and 24.9, at least for adults. We'll talk about youths next mod and how these numbers don't match up. But with adults, we want it somewhere between those 2 ranges, right? If we're above 24.9 and we're anywhere from 25 to 29.9, that's going to be considered overweight. Honestly, looking at, a couple people in our class, right? Like you guys are people who work out regularly, like I'm not the most muscular dude in the world, but even like thanks to the muscles in my looking at me, one leg, looking at me, you'd be like, oh, that's a thin person. But my BMI is actually, I'm way a little bit more than I look. And so like BMI wise, I'm kind of creeping up into the overweight category, not quite. But that is very much like one of the problems with using the BMI statistics, like it is just based on body weight. It's not taking into account body composition. But overweight is going to be anywhere from 25 to just under 30, so 29.9. And then we've got obese, anything greater than 30. And that's where we start to see like increased health risks out the wazoo. And there is like different classes of obesity. There's class 2, class 3. But honestly, just if it's above 30, it's like, all right, well, then we need to work on losing weight. You know, it's like, well, what if it's class 2 versus class 3? Doesn't matter. If it's above 30, we need to work on it, you know, because that is going to help us. So we are currently seeing the same about 1/3 of Americans being obese, right? That's above like 30% for sure. We're a bit closer to 40% right now, and we are about 73% overweight. And we see increased risk with overweight as well, you know. So generally accepted causes, like what the heck is going on here, you know, like why it just keeps spiking up. Well, there are obviously like going to be environmental factors at play here, you know. I think one of the reasons Colorado is typically one of the healthiest states is because there's just a lot of outdoor activities to do in Colorado. It's got the perfect mixture of like some rain and some weather. It's up in the mountains, you know, but it's also relatively sunny. There's just a lot of physical fun stuff to do in Colorado. And so because of that, they're probably surrounded by it. So there's just more physically active stuff. We do see obesity much more commonly in metropolitan areas where there's less access to like going outdoors and, you know, playing in parks and things like that for kids. That's a big deal. This is one of the reasons why, like, you know, anytime someone's like, and look, I'm not trying to get political here, but like for me personally, anytime they're like, hey, we're going to spend tax money on building a new park, if I hear that, I'm already on board. I'm just instantly, because what's important to me is like people's health. And I know that there is a direct translation there. Now, obviously, you should consider things like that more carefully, but like that is totally like how I see things sometimes. I'm like, look, whatever makes people healthier and just like gets them to take more control over their health and stuff, I'm on board with it, you know. I think LA has done a great job of installing all the workout gear in all the parks around here. They killed it. I love all that stuff, you know. And I think that is really great for people who are learning how to do like calisthenics and stuff. New York has like these really amazing like workout calisthenic parks, which are in concrete, you know, environments, but like they're places to go exercise and be physically active. So some of it's environmental. It's what you were exposed to as a kid, you know. Again, like I grew up in a you know, area of the world that is, you know, mostly just like the most like, yeah, like the joke I always make is like I grew up in the whitest part of white Oregon, you know, like, and so it's like everybody drinks milk, you know, like it's a big deal. And yet most of the world is lactose intolerant, you know. So your environment's definitely going to play a factor there. We can't dispute that. You know, if we hear where somebody's from Mississippi, chances are like obesity is more of a struggle for them. Lifestyle is a big one. We do know that like one of the biggest reasons we think obesity is growing, the world we live in now is easier in a lot of ways. And that has made our lives great and is awesome. Like I love my freaking phone. It's horrible for me in a lot of ways, but like I'm glad that I'm connected. I can look things up whenever I want. You know, we've got amazing technology, which has made our lives better in a lot of ways, but something else has had to give, you know, like I just heard my washer go off actually down the hall. Somebody is doing laundry right now, you know, like you throw it in, you leave. It used to be you had to scrub your freaking laundry, you know. My girlfriend just got a new apartment last night. She like got the keys. And like I was like, you don't have a dishwasher. And I was like, how do we get a dishwasher in here? She's like, I don't need a dishwasher. And I was like, oh no, if I'm gonna come over, we need a dishwasher. You know, like because I don't like doing the dishes, right? But guess what? Doing the dishes burns calories. It's a little bit like that's one of the reasons we think we've created a world that biologically doesn't make as much sense. Has anybody seen WALL-E? Anybody see that movie? Pixar movie, WALL-E?
Where everybody's all fat because the robots do everything for them.
They do everything for them. Yeah, absolutely.
They just lay there in their chairs.
Yeah.
Sodas.
I remember like seeing that movie and like, I remember when that movie came out, so many people were like, well, that movie was preachy. Like, oh, they're really just like laying it on thick and like judging everybody and being very preachy. And I was like, that is the wrong reaction. Like, this is science fiction that is slowly becoming science fact. And you are upset because it reflects how you live. I was like, ah. And like, I just remember being really frustrated after that movie came out because I love that movie. And I was like, this is a cautionary tale.
Hey, Brad, I have a question. Well, actually, I have a statement. So you have like all these like fitness people talking about, well, if the government invested more in health and paid for people to go to the gym, but could you imagine trying to force fat, stubborn Americans to go to the gym and eat healthy?
So that's an interesting part of the conversation, right? Like, again, I don't want to get into politics here, but this is where like there's sort of a difference between like sometimes people like talk about like the idea of like what it is to be like free, because what you're describing is like somebody would say, this is a free country, you can't force me to work out, you can't force me to eat healthy, right? I think that that's true. I think that we can't force people to do that. But it also kind of goes back to what we talked about in our last course, where I was like, we talked about that guided self-help. It's like you're leading the horse to water. You know, you can pave the road, you can light it and be like, put signs that go this freaking way, you dumb horse. You know, like you can do all that as long as you don't force somebody to do it. I think that like that's what, you know, we're trying to do when we, you know, encourage, like put more parks out in the world and stuff. You know, when we remove obstacles, it makes it easier for people to do things. I think that's the idea that we're going for here. You know, it's interesting. If you go back, if you guys want a really good time, at least I think it's a good time. If you want a really good time, watch, you know, those crash course videos that I show. Hank's brother, the guy who hosts them, his brother John does crash course US history. And he goes through US history, he goes all the way from like pre-United States actually, and he just talks about like what America was like before we got here, and then moves all the way forward. And I think it stops, I think these videos came out in like 2008. So it comes out, it stops around then. But if you guys watch Crash Course US History, the framing device that he uses to sort of like start the conversation is he talks about how the definition of freedom has changed like every 10 to 15 years throughout the entire course of our thing. So like George Bush, for instance, like what he meant by freedom whenever he would use that word is he would talk about how like, look, we should have the freedom to not be afraid of like foreign powers coming in and like messing up our country. And so like he believed in like a lot of military spending and stuff like that, because like it made everybody feel safer, and safety for him translated to freedom. If you talk about like what I think sometimes, I'm like, well, if we have the, you know, if we are free from like health problems, you know, to me, that means that like, you know, you're going to feel much more free to like live your life rather than being trapped in your own body. And it's just a different definition. It's everybody's got like a sort of a different working definition. It's a really, really great series. If you guys got a couple hours and you want to like go through it, it breaks down US. There's a lot of really fun stuff in there. But I think that he teaches it in a really interesting way. But that's lifestyle, right? Everybody's got a sort of a different take on lifestyle here. And then there are genetic factors. Make no mistake, guys. We cannot talk about obesity and the causes without understanding that some people are predisposed to struggling with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, certain types of cancers are just more prevalent in certain people, and other like genetic inherited factors, hormonal factors that people are born with, genes, things like that. You know, I tend to be a pretty bouncy person. I tend to be like, I'm always bouncing my leg. You guys probably don't see it that often, but like I fidget. I mean, you do see me fidget in my chair, I'm sure, constantly. And if you haven't noticed, you're going to from now on. Like, I tend to be a pretty like bouncy. I'm sure that that is because like I get it from my dad, who got it from his dad or mom, who got it from their dad or mom. And it's just a gene that's been passed down that generally makes someone like a little more bouncy. This is one of the reasons why I consider myself to be a hard gainer. I find it very difficult to put on muscle sometimes. And it's because like any excess calories I get, my body goes, great, we got excess calories. Let's bounce that leg all day, 24 hours, you know, and it burns calories. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about when we talk about energy balance. Certain people do not realize how sedentary they are. You know, other people do not realize how active they are. So if you have been like, I've stuck to the diet, I did the exercise program, I still didn't get the results, I didn't put on muscle, I didn't lose weight, what the hell? It's like, there are a lot of things that you were probably doing over the course of a 24-hour day that you don't realize, that are burning energy or not, you know? My girlfriend, when she moved out here from New York City, she was like, you know, she was talking about how like, I just didn't feel very good at first. And I was like, she was like, I don't get it. There's so much more sunshine. You know, what's the deal? And I was like, you were walking everywhere. She didn't have a car, you know, like in New York, you don't need one. So you take the subway everywhere. I was like, and like when I went to New York, we walked so much. And I was like, man, I was like, that's different. In LA, you drive everywhere. You don't really realize it. Like your commute time's about the same. But how you got there is very physically different. So, you know, we made a point of, you know, getting a little more active after that. She started feeling better emotionally. So weight control, when we're talking about this, is always going to come down to one thing, guys. It's always going to come down to an energy balance, right? It's a simple energy. It's simply looking at the amount of energy coming in versus the amount of energy going out. Your weight is just like your bank account. If you have more money coming in than you have money going out, then you are going to increase the amount of money in your account, which is a good thing in this case. With body fat, not so great. This is where like my analogy is like, yeah, but that's a good thing. Yeah, but like that is how it works. It's if you are bringing in more calories than you are expending, you will gain weight. Simple as that. Now, some people might hear that and go, there's no way. I followed the diet. I followed the exercise routine. We ran the numbers. That should have resulted in me losing weight. That should have resulted in me gaining weight, right? Like people will look at that and then they'll say, there's got to be some other factor at play here. And they're right. There is another factor at play. We just haven't figured out what it is yet for that client. You know, it could be that your client sticks to the exercise and diet program, but they're not getting enough sleep. So then their body is just producing stress hormones all the time, slowing all of their metabolism down. So they're just burning less calories. And it's like that workout, I ran the numbers, you should have burned 600 calories. You, because you have like so much stress hormones in your body, ended up burning closer to 400. That difference adds up. That's a half a pound a week, you know? So there it is, right? We've got that's one answer out of a million possibilities, right? That's one example. So, but here's what we know, and this is just capital T true, guys. Birds fly, fish swim, grass is green, sky is blue, right? These are all true things. If you have more energy coming in than you have energy going out, it will result in weight gain. If you have less energy coming in than you have going out, it will result in weight loss. And if the amount of energy coming in is equal to the amount of energy going out, your weight will stay the same. That is true, no matter how untrue emotionally or psychologically it feels to us sometimes. You know, when I get frustrated, when I'm not getting the results I'm supposed to get, and I'm like, I did everything I was supposed to do, I take a second to go, what else has happened that's either speeding me up or slowing me down, or what hormonal differences are there? You know, like I feel great this morning, but I did not get a good night's sleep. So chances are like my body is flooded with stress hormones right now, you know. That's going to lower the results. I'm probably not going to, you know, perform quite as well, which is why I plan on taking a nap around 2 o'clock today. So how the obesity rates have changed, obviously we've seen it go up, right? We estimated, this is back in 2015 is when this slide came out, that 70% of Americans were overweight. It is a little bit higher than that now. It is actually a little bit closer to 73%. We estimate about 35% of US adults were obese. That's a little bit closer to 40% now. So what the heck? Again, technology, right? We know that technology makes our lives easier. Unfortunately, that means we burn less calories. And you wouldn't think that, oh, just because I can do my dishes by throwing them into a dishwasher, just because I can throw my laundry in and I can throw it into the dryer, I don't have to touch it. I don't have to hang it on clothes wires. I got a Roomba that does all my vacuuming for me. I got another Roomba that does all my mopping for me. You wouldn't think that that makes a big difference. But you have to remember, this is over the course of years, right? Let's say you would burn an extra 50 calories from mopping the floor, and you would burn an extra 25 calories from sweeping. You'd burn an extra 10 calories from doing your dishes, and you'd burn an extra 20 calories from hanging up your laundry, right? We're getting close to about 100 calorie difference, right? Over the course of a year, that's 100 calories, right? And let's say that's every day. You're missing out on 100 extra calories, but that's all it is, 100, right? A snack pack, right? And that's over the course of a 365-day year. That's going to be a difference of 36,500 100 calories over the course of a year, divided by 3,500 calories, which we know are in a pound of fat, that is 10 pounds in a year. Now, what will happen is when you start to increase your body weight, let's say by 5 pounds or 1 pound even, your BMR is going to go up. It takes more energy to run more cells. So eventually it plateaus out, because that, when I run that math, it makes it seem like, well, then I'd be gaining 10 pounds a year. That didn't happen, right? Right. But it would bring you to here. Now suddenly you're in balance, right? Just like if your bank account has an extra $100 in it at the end of every month, you're like, I got an extra $100. So then you feel this thing where you're like, well, now I can go, I can get the new, I can go back to getting Hulu without ads. Yeah, so you increase your spending in response to having money left over. And eventually, guess what? You are no longer having money left over. You're balanced out. Same thing is true of your body weight, right? Your weight creeps up. Now you're in balance. So technology is a big one. Food accessibility. We also just have a lot more access to crappy food, especially in the United States. But in really any developed country, there's just a lot of fast food and things like that. There is a direct correlation between fast food access and obesity. I mean, literally, it's a straight line. They look at it in every county. The more counties that have the more fast food, those are the counties that have a lot more obesity statistics every single time. I remember I went to Connecticut to visit a friend. And while I was out there, it was a small town. They have this interesting policy there where there's no drive-throughs allowed. They're still allowed to have the fast food restaurants, but this town has a super intense historical society. So everything has to look old timey. It all looks like it's out of that movie Hocus Pocus. The whole town looks like that, all everywhere, including the McDonald's. So McDonald's will look like, an old school restaurant. And but they're not allowed to have drive-throughs because it messes up the traffic in this very small town. And I noticed, I remember looking around and being like, this is crazy. There's a lot of fit people here. And then I looked it up, and it was, let's see if I can even find it. Avon, Connecticut, obesity rates. The obesity rates are freaking low. Okay, this is back in 2013, which is not that great. It's not very current. No, that's actually not helping. Anyway, this will take forever to look up. But yeah, so anyway, they have it by county, and I looked it up at one point. I put the effort in, which I'm not doing now, and had it showed that there were lower obesity statistics. And it was just a fun conversation I was having with the people I was staying with, my friends. We were looking it up because she was dieting at the time. And so it was kind of a fun thing to do. There is societal contribution as well. We do know that social norms have shifted towards oh, you don't have a dishwasher, you got to get a dishwasher. I did that last night, right? That's probably causing obesity growth, right? I get ads constantly for meal prep services and things like that. They're you don't have to go to the grocery store, yeah, that's a big one, right? We do see obesity is going to be much more prevalent in countries that have a lot more money to spend on goods and services like that. So obesity is going to be less common in countries that it's not standard to have a dishwasher. It's not standard to have a washer and dryer in your unit. You have to walk to the laundromat to do that. Those places do have a lower risk of obesity. So again, these are some of the things I want you to think about when we're thinking about why somebody is dealing with obesity. There's a lot of underlying causes. So we do know that's growing at an alarming rate. And so we have to kind of come in and hopefully combat this stuff. Any questions, guys? Questions, comments? All right. Let's take a look at chapter 2. So this will be chapter 2 in the little manual. So you'll just scroll through that and get to chapter 2 here. Now, chapter 2 is really similar to last night's lesson. I'm going to move through it relatively quickly, but it does still have all the same. It has like a lot of really good notes in here to kind of help with this. Yesterday, we looked at some of the diseases associated with poor nutrition. Well, now we're looking at some of the diseases associated with obesity, which those two things do go hand in hand, but here we go. So we want to be able to understand the difference, different comorbidities. Those are conditions that we deal with associated with obesity, the common medications that are sort of associated with them, and then what our exercise guidelines are. So we do know that obesity is linked to a lot of different diseases. So we are going to be talking about comorbidities. That's a health-related condition that has some type of effect on normal living. So it's like this disease that lives on your back that, you know, is your co-roommate that's screwing everything up in your life. Yeah. Type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, respiratory complications, cancers, dyslipidemia or high cholesterol, and metabolic syndrome or syndrome X, which we'll talk about at the very end there. Musculoskeletal problems and depression, right? So type 2 diabetes. Now, particularly, we are talking about type 2 diabetes. So yeah, last time we talked about diabetes in general. When we're talking about obesity, you are not at increased risk of type 1 diabetes with obesity. You are at increased risk of type 2, which is where your cells are resistant to the insulin. Your pancreas is working just fine with type 2 diabetes, but your cells are no longer responding to it. Similar to how caffeine works, right? It used to be 1 cup of coffee, and I'd be like, I need 10 cups of coffee. And I'm like, yeah, I feel better. You know, hopefully that's not true for anybody. But that is, right? Like, that's how that works. Sometimes like pre-workout. I talked to Mo. Mo loves pre-workout, by the way. I personally don't love it. And we talk about it all the time. We make a lot of jokes about it. And like, he was like, oh yeah, he's like, I do a cycle every now and then where I'll take 2 weeks off. And it's like during deload weeks and things like that, where I'm relaxing, because without my pre-workout, like I just don't have as much energy. And what that 2 weeks off does is it resensitizes him to the pre-workout. It allows his body to kind of calm down and then, you know, become sensitive again. So type 2 diabetes, 90 to 95% of all diabetic cases are type 2. And really, this is a disease that would not exist if we didn't develop that resistance to insulin. That's crazy. This is a completely preventable disease. Now, can we cure this through diet and exercise? We can't really use the word cure because it's not like, hey, you're cured. It doesn't really work like that. But you can resensitize your cells to your insulin through diet and exercise. So then the disease goes away and you're not dealing with it anymore. Is that cured? Kinda, right? So do personal trainers cure diabetes? Certainly not. We do not say that. But do we like get it to kind of go away and not come back? Yeah, kinda. You know, with this, obviously working with like medical professionals as well. So type 2 diabetes is, again, your body is becoming resistant. Now, remember, we said it's where insulin doesn't work the way it's supposed to, right? Insulin is supposed to drive sugar out of your blood. It's created by your pancreas, tells your body cells to uptake the sugar, right? Now, if that doesn't happen, what'll end up happening is you'll often suffer from peripheral neuropathy. We call it peripheral because it's around the outside of the body. The nerves and blood vessels in your fingers and toes are small because these are small parts of our bodies. So that's the peripheral parts of our bodies. This is usually where that nerve damage occurs, but it can happen anywhere in the body. But it's nerve damage that usually is in the extremities, and particularly the toes and fingers, where they will experience a numbness, a tingling, a burning sensation, aches or pains in those extremities. And then they won't feel what else is happening there. So they won't be aware of the fact that like they might have a cut on their foot or a blister or something like that. And that's why one of the big things we talk about, and I promise you this is a homework question somewhere in the program, one of the biggest things that we do as trainers is ensure that our clients are wearing proper footwear. So guys, learn about socks, learn about shoes, figure out how to make your clients' feet comfortable. When I worked at Biggest Loser, I literally spent every day cleaning and patching up people's feet. It was the least glamorous part of my job, but they were going on 2 hours of hikes a day. And so like if somebody got a blister, cannot feel it because they have neuropathy, and that blister gets infected, they could lose their foot. So Not great, right? Thanks, diabetes. That's not good. So we're trying to avoid that, right? We want to exercise as much as possible. Exercise has been shown to have very positive benefits when it comes to helping us become more sensitive to insulin, so our cells take that sugar better, and when it comes to our body lowering our actual blood sugar itself. So when you exercise, you are going to probably end up somewhere in glycolysis. If I had you do even 15 repetitions, which is relatively high, we're getting close to aerobic there, you had to go through the first 12. When you got to rep 6, all the way from like rep 6 to rep 12, you were probably in glycolysis. So like out of a 15 rep, that's about half the time. It's pretty good, right? And 15 reps is going to burn a lot of calories, right? So that's also good. So high repetitions with like weightlifting, or maybe just stay in low repetitions and just lift heavy, right? Say somewhere between 6 and 12 repetitions, you're going to spend a lot of time in glycolysis, which is why I treat my diabetic clients like bodybuilders. And that seems a little weird. You would think that those are two very different people. It's one group that's trying to increase body weight. It's another group that's trying to decrease it. But I treat their workouts the same because glycolysis is going to burn sugar. It's going to increase insulin sensitivity for my diabetics. And then glycolysis is good for muscle growth for my bodybuilders. So that's why exercise is so freaking good, right? Now, if my client has heart disease, I treat it a little bit differently, right? I focus a little bit more on long duration aerobic because our heart is mostly comprised of not even type 1 muscle. It's like type 1/2. It's really type 1, lots and lots of mitochondria. So it relies much more on the aerobic system. So I want to get the heart rate up and I want to keep it there, right? For a long duration. And focus more on that if my client has heart disease, right? So heart disease, leading cause of death in the US. It kills more people in the US than anything else. Now, this is not the leading cause of death in the world, by the way. Leading cause of death in the world is actually going to be, yeah, I was about to say that's heart disease, but that actually is not what we see. Hold on. Oh, I forgot. I got to put them together. Actually, yeah, this does actually work. Sorry. So take a look here. Heart disease by itself is the #1 cause, but take a look here. You see diarrheal diseases plus all of the other like waterborne illnesses, #1 killer, right? That actually kills more people than anything else, especially kids, right? So like diarrhea, dysentery, malaria, things like that in like non-developed countries, #1 killer of humans on the planet. But heart disease is what kills us the most here. And that is completely preventable through like diet and exercise. Don't get me wrong. Some people are going to be born with a bum ticker, and their heart's not going to function quite as well as it should be able to. That's going to count, but that is so rare. And yet 25% of all the deaths in the United States, a little bit higher than that actually now, are heart disease. So, and a big part of that is because there are a lot of different conditions that are all kind of coming together. Heart disease can manifest itself from coronary artery disease, which is usually like cholesterol and hypertension, to like strokes and things like that as well. So there's a lot of things coming together, which sort of boost the statistic a little bit, but still, this is something this is all related to a weak cardiorespiratory system. So hypertension, right? So coronary artery disease is the narrowing of the blood vessels that go to the heart itself. So you might end up with what's called a myocardial infarction. It's a big fancy name for a heart attack, right? So we always hear in TV shows like, he's got a myocardial infarction. It's like, they mean heart attack. And it's where blood doesn't get to the heart, right? You literally, it looks like this. If I look up a picture, the coronary arteries get blocked and then blood doesn't get to the heart. You see how it's discolored? That should be bright red. This is oxygenated tissue. That should be bright red, but instead it's this dark, dark, dark tissue. It's not, it's the heart cells are suffocating. That's basically what's happening in a heart attack. And it's the pump. So we don't want to suffocate the pump. Hypertension is a really dangerous one. This is high blood pressure, right? That's going to be chronic pressure above 140/90. Yesterday, when I went to this medical thing, they always test my blood pressure first, and it was like it was like 100 over like 7 because I'd just been driving for an hour, so I was doing nothing physically active, and I walked up an elevator and sat down again, and they were like, your blood pressure's a little too low for us to like do that. I was like, all right, hold on a second. I got up, I did like a bunch of jumping jacks, and I went and I sat back down. I was like, okay, now do it. And then my blood was like 130 over. So then all of a sudden I was like relatively high blood pressure, right? Your blood pressure is going to shift all the time. But when it is chronically at rest above 140 over 90 constantly, that's too high. We ideally want it to be 120 over 80 or below. This is often called the silent killer because a lot of times, guys, hypertension is causing so many of our other problems. Blood is not getting delivered the way it's supposed to certain tissues. And high blood pressure for years and years and years is what causes problems. It's not like you get high blood pressure for a day and then all of a sudden you've got health problems. It is like slowly over a lifetime. So it is so associated with a lot of the other comorbidities. Hypertension is associated with heart attacks. It's associated with stroke. It's associated with kidney problems and liver problems. Because remember, blood is flowing through those things. So imagine like, if you've ever worked with a pressure washer, turning that freaking thing on full blast and then running it through your kidneys, it's going to blast, it's going to cause damage. So we don't love it for that. There's stroke. Stroke is associated with obesity. There's a blocked cerebral artery. Stroke, by the way, is exactly the same as a heart attack, just in the brain. So basically what ends up happening is instead of like blocking the arteries that go to the heart, you block the arteries that go to the brain, which causes like a death of cell tissue in the brain. This is why one of the warning signs for people who have stroke is like one side of their face will start drooping. These cells that are the brain cells that are controlling the muscles in the face are suffocating and dying. And so then all of a sudden they are losing muscle control. So they'll start slurring their speech and things like that. You'll hear that in stroke victims. It is highly associated with hypertension. It's highly associated with heart disease. Diabetes, too much sugar can cause a stroke. And then genetic factors and alcohol abuse. Alcohol abuse causes hypertension problems. So in a roundabout way, it comes right back to stroke. Respiratory complications are associated with obesity. We do know that carrying around excess fat makes it difficult for respiratory muscles to be able to contract. So shortness of breath, exercise-induced asthma, and then even something like sleep apnea, right? So sleep apnea is where someone will be sleeping and their muscles will relax. And then all of a sudden, due to excessive body weight, they'll start, they won't take a breath in. So and then all of a sudden, they'll wake up and like take a big deep breath in. It's very scary. Happens to bodybuilders too, by the way. Like too much muscle can cause this as well. But it's a sudden stoppage of breathing. And so then all of a sudden you don't get a good night's sleep. You make all these stress hormones, and then that leads right back around to obesity again. So, sleep apnea is not, it's like, oh, it's just their sleep. It's not actually that dangerous. It's not, but it actually does cause health complications in other ways. Certain types of cancers, particularly colon cancer, breast cancer, kidney cancer, and esophageal cancer. That esophageal one is very interesting to me. That's where I'm like, that's highly associated with like tobacco chewing. And so I wonder if that's just kind of tied into the statistic. Like, again, the same group of people who are struggling with obesity are the same people who are chewing tobacco, maybe, or smoking, maybe. Smoking is highly associated with obesity and highly associated with esophageal cancer. But there maybe are some other factors at play there as well. Your thyroid's nearby, and if your thyroid is trying to keep up with all these stress hormones, that could also lead to this. But that one fascinates me, and I don't fully understand the reasons behind that one. But we do know in general, you are 1.5 to 3.5 times more likely at developing cancer when you are above a normal weight, right? More cells, more problems, basically, is how I like to kind of explain it in one sentence. Hyperlipidemia or dyslipidemia. Dys just means dysfunctional, so dysfunctional cholesterol. That's an increased total cholesterol and triglyceride concentration inside your blood. So remember, we've got those two types of cholesterol, right? High density lipoproteins, that's HDL, and low density lipoproteins, that's the LDL. There's technically the third category, which is that VLDL, very low density. These are like the devil. This is made from trans fats, so that, get it out of your diet. But we got bad cholesterol here. We got good cholesterol here. We want to have a good balance between the two, right? We want our good cholesterol to clean out our blood vessels, and we want our bad cholesterol to not get stuck on our blood vessels. So the HDL is the good stuff. That's highly associated with like liquid oils and things like that. And the LDL is the bad stuff. That's usually associated with like solid fats, butters, saturated fats, things of that nature. But losing as little as like 5 to 10 pounds, guys, it can lower your cholesterol levels, just 5 to 10 pounds, you know? And then getting plenty of fiber in your diet. We do know, NASM does not talk about this enough. We do know that like fiber actually gives your gut bacteria something to eat, and then your gut bacteria releases fatty acid chains into your blood, lowering your bad cholesterol and raising your good cholesterol. So fiber, in a really weird roundabout way, also is very good for cholesterol. This is why Cheerios gets to say it'll lower your cholesterol, because Cheerios has fiber in it. For the record, Cheerio has a very small amount of fiber compared with like an actual fiber cereal, and certainly compared to like vegetables. So eat those instead. Now, one of the interesting ones we also have is what's called metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is a really interesting condition. Sometimes they call this syndrome X, and this is where we know that obesity is causing problems. We do not fully understand why. So for instance, if you guys ever get a chance to watch this documentary, I actually, for the record, the whole thing is a commercial for juicing. I'm not pro juicing, but I do like this documentary. It's called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, and it follows this guy here, who, by the way, again, is the CEO of Breville Juicing. Like, yeah, if this guy, Joe Cross, he is Joe Cross. Is CEO of Reboot, which is a health and lifestyle brand that sells juicers. So clearly he's got an agenda, you know. But one thing I like about this movie, as a movie fan, I enjoy it. If you look at him before and after, you can see he was a heavy dude. He was out of shape, right? And you will actually see in the pictures, well, you'll see in the documentary, he's got like a lot of skin problems. You can see he has like kind of like like blushing and rashing and things like that. And he went to his doctor to figure out like what was going on. He was like, hey, I've clearly got some type of allergy. And his doctor was like, you're not tested for anything. Your body is just so unhealthy that it's creating like antihistamines to itself. You are allergic to the way you live your life, is what his doctor told him, which is relatively true. And so he was struggling with what we call metabolic syndrome. And it's where fat does this really interesting thing that's very bad for us, where it starts to act like its own organ, and then your body starts to attack itself. And that's very bad. So then all of a sudden it starts causing hypertension, it starts causing diabetes, it's blood clots. And then inflammation, like you would not believe. We call that a pro-inflammatory state. Your body starts releasing, because that's what your body does, right? You know, when you sprain your ankle and your ankle puffs up, right? It gets inflamed, right? You scratch something, it gets inflamed. That's what your body does. Your body goes, I don't know what to do. Put some fluid around it. You know, like that's your body's first solution to everything. And so that's inflammation. Your joints start to hurt, you know? That is part of metabolic syndrome. We don't fully understand it. We don't really know why this is the case, but we do know that like it is caused by obesity. So hot, awesome. And then there are certain musculoskeletal problems associated with obesity. You know, joint stiffness, again, inflammation, decreased range of motion, tendonitis, ligament sprains. Your body's heavier, right? Like it's literally just dealing with impact, right? And so like when we look at like force and velocity, you know, we're trying to figure out like the amount of like force that's interacting with something else. We look at all these things. Someone who's obese is going to have a lot more impact every day. And so their joints are going to get worn down. You're going to run into regular old arthritis. We call that osteoarthritis, where it's like damage within the joint capsules. Good Lord. Damage in the joints, right? Low back pain is probably the most common of them. Again, excessive abdominal fat causes your posture to alter, usually causing the low back to overarch, which puts more pressure on your discs in the backside of things. 80% of people deal with low back pain. We do know that obesity is very common amongst most people. So there's definitely a connection there. Not that you can't get low back pain if you are, in great shape. But that's costing another $120 million just right there, caused mostly by like obesity and stuff. So being overweight and obese have a lot of debilitating health diseases. And a lot of times simply improving your physical activity and diet can have really positive benefits. So that is what we will be talking about over the next 10 days in our program design class here. We're going to talk about like what type of routines are going to help combat all of this negative stuff we've been talking about this whole time the most effectively. Could somebody lose a lot of weight doing like a max strength routine, lifting like 5 sets of 5 reps? Yeah, absolutely. Probably not my favorite way to do it. I think there's a lot of risks associated with that, but like that's what this class is all about. We're going to talk about like why I wouldn't do that most of the time, because I don't think that's the most effective way to combat this stuff. We want to use the best tools on the best things. I can get a screw through the drywall with a hammer if I hit it hard enough. Probably not the best way to do it, and that's kind of what we're doing over the next 10 days. And that's it, guys. It was shorter today. I know I'm booting you out of here a little early, but anybody got any questions or anything today? David, Joseph, Chris, Mir, how you guys feeling?
Not too many questions, no. Just like so depending on where our client's at, that's usually where we want to start off, right? So if they're like diabetic, you want to be like, okay, well, this person mentioned they're diabetic. Let me see what happens, and then we'll go from there. But most importantly, you want to be informed on this situation, no?
Yeah, I think that like when you think about like if they've got diabetes, if they're at a risk for bad cholesterol and stuff like that, you start working on the obesity and the other things will go away naturally. The way I like to summarize it is that like weight loss is the byproduct of an overall healthy lifestyle.
Okay, like it's not the major goal. It's more like just getting them healthy, but they get into better shape because of that. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Mir, how you feeling?
I'm good, bro. Thank you.
Love it. All right.
Yeah.
All right, fellas, let's kill the recording.